What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Eugenio Suarez monstrous return to the D-backs lineup. Can Paul Sewald lead the league in saves in the battle for backup infield spots?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your always charismatic host, Millard Thomas. Spring training is in the air, and we'll talk a whole lot about the D-backs this spring training because they took down the San Diego Padres on Tuesday, and we got to see Suarez's return to the lineup with a monstrous home run. We get to see a little Paul Sewald, who we'll talk about in segment number 2. Can he lead the league in saves? And we'll talk about the battle for the backup infield spots on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And of course, thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube, so please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. We are slowly approaching 1,000 subscribers. Want to hit that number before opening day, so please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. And this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb. and use code all lowercase Locked on MLB for a first deposit match up to $100. But now let's talk about Tuesday's spring training game because the D-backs were able to go back to 500 this spring training against the San Diego Padres, who we will of course be seeing a ton, right, in the regular season. The Padres, of course, one of the biggest D-backs rivals from the NL West. Love seeing the D-backs beat up on the San Diego Padres, and they were able to do that a little bit on Tuesday. We had Ryne Nelson start this game for the D-backs. He's been in a tightly contested battle with Tommy Henry, and like Tommy Henry in his most recent start, who got roughed up a little bit. Again, this is the battle for the number 5 job, so sometimes I have to remind myself, these guys are not going to be perfect every spring training outing. There's a reason why they're going for the last spot in the rotation. So Tommy Henry coming off an outing where he already got roughed up a little bit. Ryne Nelson with a chance to really make a name for himself in this competition and potentially pass Tommy Henry. And I don't think he did that on Tuesday. Did have himself a fine outing, 3 innings, 5 hits, 2 earned runs, a couple strikeouts, didn't give up any long balls, but wasn't really able to generate any swings and misses with that fastball, which is his go-to pitch. And then his secondary pitch, that slider, gave up some loud contact on it. So not the best Ryne Nelson day, but he didn't seem too concerned. That's always the sentiment coming out of spring training. These pitchers are never concerned. Torey Lovullo wasn't very concerned either. He said the fastball had some life on it. Again, just these guys need to be better at executing sometimes, and just didn't seem like Ryne Nelson's day. You look at his velocity, like his velocity was still up. That was still looking really good. So still a lot of positive numbers for Ryne Nelson coming out of this ball game. So even though I would still have Tommy Henry in the lead for the number 5 job, again, super, super close competition. And Ryne Nelson could be in the lead any day. If he goes out there and last 2-3 outings is just scoreless, no earned runs, racks up the Ks, gives up like 2 hits, then yeah, he could definitely pass to Tommy Henry in the rotation. And Tommy Henry also has the opportunity to solidify that number 5 job if he goes out there and does the same thing that I just mentioned that Ryne Nelson could do. So both of these guys in a tightly contested battle for the number 5 job. Ryne Nelson, like I said, velo was still up in this game, which you like to see. Fastball, cutter, changeup, curveball, velocity was up on all of it. So I think from what he's been working on this offseason, we still seeing some improvements in his pitches in this outing, despite not it being the most clean outing by Ryne Nelson this spring training. But someone whose velocity was a little bit down, Paul Sewald, who we'll talk about in segment number 2 about can he lead the league in saves. I don't think it's anything to be concerned about just yet. It was like his first outing or something this spring training, but velo was down a little bit, only sitting at 89 miles per hour. He's typically a guy that sits at 92 miles per hour. For someone that is mostly a two-pitch guy or going to need that fastball to be a little bit crisp, going to need him to throw a little bit harder. We're not worried about Paul Sewald at all. We've got a whole big segment that we're going to talk about with Paul Sewald in segment number 2, so we're not going to get into too much conversation about him right now, but we're not worried about him in spring training just yet. But if he continues to look like this as we get close to opening day, where he can never crack 90 miles per hour on his fastball, then we'll be a little bit concerned once we get over to that area, but we're not there just yet. Justin Martinez, he had himself a clean outing. Of course, the dude can throw as hard as anyone in the major leagues. He was still averaging 100 miles per hour on a sinker, fastball averaging 99, still throws it super hard, super clean outing by him today. I mean, if anything happens to this D-backs bullpen throughout the season, I don't think he's like the first, second, or like third option that the D-backs will call up from the minor leagues, but he is in that, maybe the top 5 of minor leaguers the D-backs will call up from the pitching ranks to help them out throughout the season, especially if they're looking for that high variance guy who can mow some people down via the strikeout. Justin Martinez is going to be your guy with how hard he can throw that fastball and how hard he can throw that sinker ball. Miguel Castro, of course, gave up an earned run. I mean, not very excited for the prospects of Miguel Castro this season, but we will, of course, see how it goes, and hopefully he pitches better in the regular season. Ketel Marte, he continues to crush it in spring training. He had another hit today. He scored a run. His slash line now this spring training, 556 average, 619 OBP, 778 slugging. I don't care how repetitive or redundant I get. Ketel Marte is incoming for a monster season in 2024. Take the over on all the Ketel Marte stats, maybe even get a little crazy and just place a very, very, very small sprinkle on Ketel Marte's MVP odds. Then the big news out of the lineup today in spring training, Eugenio Suarez and Alek Thomas both returned to the lineup. Thomas looked good defensively out there. He was running around fine. He left the game healthy, which is probably the biggest thing for him. Still want his offense to come around, but he is batting .333 this spring training, so you'll take that. And then Eugenio Suarez absolutely clobbered a monster home run in this game. It's like 109 off the bat. Suarez showed D-backs fans the power he could potentially put on display this regular season. Again, the D-backs are going to have so much more power this upcoming season. Got Corbin Carroll, who could potentially maybe tap it to 30 home runs. I think Marte could potentially have more home runs this season. Gurriel's coming off a career high in home runs. Jock Peterson is more pop. Eugenio Suarez adds more pop to this lineup. Maybe Alek Thomas finds a little pop swing like he did in the postseason, or maybe Gabriel Moreno finds that playoff pop swing like he did this past year. So I think this D-backs lineup is going to smash way more home runs than they did in 2023 with the speed that they're bringing back from last year. The combination of that speed and power, I think, will propel this D-backs offense to get them back into the postseason mix in 2024. Now we'll talk about Paul Sewald and whether or not he can lead the league in saves in 2024. But first, I want to talk to you guys about Prize Picks, because Prize Picks is North America's largest daily fantasy sports platform. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And the app has a fun new feature called Demons and Goblins. Demon picks are marked in red, and they are the scary picks that accelerate your heartbeat because you can win big money, as in 100 times your money. So if you bet $10, you can win $100. If you're into the NBA, you can pick more than or less than on everything from 3-pointers made to turnovers committed. And for spring training baseball, you can pick more than or less than on pitcher strikeouts and first inning runs. So download the app today and enter code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB, all one word and all in lowercase letters. Get that first deposit match up to $100. Join Prize Picks today. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. I'm not going to lie, guys. I think I icked myself out with that live read. It's that easy. I don't like the way I delivered that. So I apologize if I cringed out anyone in the audience out there. But let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. But now I want to talk a little bit about Paul Sewald, like we alluded to. Talk about the D-backs' new closer for this upcoming season. Of course, we saw him in the second half last year after he was acquired from the Seattle Mariners post-trade deadline. The D-backs, as I always say, when I took over this podcast in 2020, the worst area of this D-backs team, probably since I've taken over, is that closing situation. And probably for the first time since I've taken over this podcast, we are entering the season with a legit closer. I mean, maybe you could say entering last year or the year before, whatever year we had Mark Melancon entering the season. I guess I would have said we were entering the season with a legit closer then, because he was coming off an all-star season where he led the NL in saves. Completely disappointing year by Mark Melancon. So that was probably the last time I felt like the D-backs were entering the season with a legit closer, even though that wasn't the case. Paul Sewald, way more in his prime than Mark Melancon, and we have at least seen Paul Sewald be effective in a D-back uniform, something we never saw Mark Melancon do. He was terrible from the jump with the D-back. So at least Paul Sewald, we've already seen him be good for the D-backs before, last season, postseason. So now we are super excited for his prospects for this upcoming year. And one thing that makes Paul Sewald super intriguing about for this upcoming year, because my question is, can Paul Sewald lead the league in saves in 2024? Whether you think that's Major League Baseball or just the National League, I want to know, do you think he can lead the league in saves? Because Paul Sewald has been working on a new pitch this offseason, and if he can turn that into a plus pitch, Paul Sewald can be a top 5 closer in baseball and maybe the best closer in the National League. He can definitely pitch, I think, like the best closer in the National League and potentially lead the NL in saves. This is someone that's been primarily a 2-pitch guy throughout his career. He threw the fastball last year like around 60% of the time, the slider around 40% of the time. Those are his 2 go-to pitches. But one of the issues, even if those 2 pitches are plus pitches, right? Very high level, highly effective pitches, command, location, all that stuff. Even if all that's true, it's still only 2 pitches, and that makes Paul Sewald predictable. That's why in the World Series, when he went against a former AL West foe in the Texas Rangers, a guy like Corey Seager, who is a stud, was able to jump on that fastball by Paul Sewald because he was waiting for it. And once he saw he wasn't getting the slider, he was locked in on the fastball already, and he took it for a ride. And I honestly think if the D-backs win that game, the D-backs might win the World Series. But great learning lesson for the D-backs. They're going to take that, put a chip on their shoulder for this upcoming year, and try to come out with a vengeance. And hopefully Paul Sewald, he has the biggest vengeance, because I think the biggest reason as to why he wants to develop that third pitch is because of what happened in the World Series. Way too predictable, and it costed him in one of the biggest games of the year. Now he's trying to develop like a sinking changeup. We've seen him display a few times already this spring training. It's still a work in progress, but if he's able to get a third pitch into his arsenal with that fastball slider combination, Paul Sewald goes from a really good closer to potentially an elite closer. And once again, I think can lead the league in saves. Right now, if you go on FanDuel and look at his odds to lead the entire Major League Baseball in saves, it's like at plus 2,300 right now. He's like 15th in odds among closers to lead the league in saves. Just among NL closers, he's still middle of the pack. He's like 7th or 8th among NL closers to lead the league in saves. So not a lot of respect, I think, for Paul Sewald. I just don't think he's getting enough respect in terms of the odds. And I think one of the reasons why he's actually a very good bet to potentially lead the league in saves, not just because he's talented. I do think he's good enough to lead the league in saves, even though he's obviously not Josh Hader, not, Alexis Diaz or some of these elite closers. I think he's talented, but I don't think he's an elite talent like we've seen with some of these guys. But one of the reasons why I do think the value is so good for him is because I just think, even though he may not be the most talented, I just think he's going to get the volume. I think there's as many opportunities for Paul Sewald to close games as any closer in baseball. I mean, just look what he did with the D-backs last year in the second half. He had 13 saves in 17.2 innings pitched, and he felt like at one point he was coming out game after game. Anytime the D-backs needed to close the game, Paul Sewald was coming out the pen. And because of that volume, I think Paul Sewald is a great value. I also think the D-backs are just going to be in a lot of close games next year, just like they were in 2023. Now, hopefully the D-backs are better in those close games, and hopefully they do have more blowouts. But the D-backs were in 42 one-run games last year. I think they'll probably be around that mark once again this year. But the difference is the D-backs had a 500 record last year in one-run games, literally 21-21. with a 0-run differential. So they were as even as you could get in one-run games. Hopefully the D-backs go from a 500 record to maybe a 560 record in one-run games. Maybe you go 27-20 now one-run games, and all of a sudden you're like a 90-win ball club if you're the D-backs. I think having Paul Sewald in the back of your bullpen, I think that changes that formula because again, Mark Melancon was probably the last time I felt good about entering the regular season with a closer, but I think Paul Sewald is going to be the first guy since I've taken over this podcast where at the end of the season, I felt good about the D-backs closing situation. Last year in save situations, the D-backs had a 5.35 ERA. I'm just not that concerned with save situations for the D-backs this upcoming season. If Paul Sewald just replicates what he did in 2023 this upcoming year, I think every D-backs fan would feel like we finally found the answer to our closing problem. Now we'll talk about the battle for backup infield spots and how I think it should be divvied up. But if you need any parts for your ride or die, then the best place to get that is eBay Motors, because passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Please don't forget to hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube, because I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers before opening day. So please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get back to the show and let's talk about the battle for backup infield, because this competition for the backup infield spots just got a lot more tough with the addition of Elvis Andrus. Of course, I'll go through it again. 26-man roster. D-backs would probably carry 13 pitchers. So that leaves 13 position players. If you're going to have 9 normal guys in your lineup, plus a Randall Grichuk makes 10, plus a backup catcher makes 11, Jose Herrera. Now that only leaves 2 positions for your backup infield spots, and your candidates for your 2 positions are Jordan Lawler, Blaze Alexander, Elvis Andrus, Jace Peterson, Emmanuel Rivera, Pavin Smith, and Kevin Newman. So that's 7 realistic candidates for just 2 spots. So how should those jobs be divvied up? Like, who should actually win those 2 infield spots? from that competition that I just laid out. So let's actually sift through the competition and weed out the people on the margins. First off, Jordan Lawler is the guy everyone loves, and I think people want him to be the shortstop right now. Like, if there was no Geraldo Perdomo, I think Jordan Lawler would be the D-backs starting shortstop this year, because all the D-backs have said is they want to give him as many opportunities as starting shortstop from day one as possible, and that's just not possible on the major league level right now. So he has to go back to AAA to get those reps at the start of the season, because that's just where the D-backs want to put him on his developmental plan right now. They want him to get as many reps as possible once the season starts. He's just not going to get down the major league level. So I think you can weed out Jordan Lawler for a backup role, just because I just don't think there's a realistic role for him right now with the D-backs. So he's starting the season in AAA. Unfortunately, the other guy that I think we have to rule out from this competition, even though he was a first-round pick by the D-backs, I think it's Pavin Smith. Offensively, he can swing for a solid average, get good contact, but he's just a singles guy. He doesn't strike out a ton, which is good, but probably doesn't walk enough, gives you absolutely no slugging, and he's mostly just a singles hitter. Then defensively, can't throw him in right field, not athletic enough to track down the balls, arm not strong enough. And at first base, even though he's a natural first baseman, he doesn't have like the defensive instincts to be maybe above average. Like, at best, he's an average defender at first base, and that's at best. So if he doesn't give you anything offensively, he doesn't give you anything defensively, outside of an injury to Christian Walker, I just don't know how Pavin Smith plays into this team, even as a backup, because Christian Walker will healthy play over 150 games. So that 1 or 2 games where you want to give him a rest, I mean, you could call up Pavin Smith, or maybe you could even just get crazy and put, one of these other options that we're going to talk about as your backup first baseman. So I think Pavin Smith is on the outside looking in. So with that being the case, and dwindling it down to just the competition between the rest of the folks, how should spring training shake up for those backup infield spots? Blaze Alexander, of course, super deserving. He's going to be 25 years old. I think because of that age, I think he's ready for prime time with the D-backs. With how he's looked this spring training, I think he's definitely deserving of a spot. I think outside Jordan Lawler, he's the guy everyone is rooting to win one of those jobs this camp. Elvis Andrus, the most established veteran in that competition that I've mentioned, but he's also old, and I think he's kind of cooked at this stage of his career. Jace Peterson, he is on a big league contract, getting real money from the D-backs and the Oakland A's. So just because of that contract, he has the case to be a backup infielder. And also, let's give a little respect to Jace Peterson. He is having himself a very good spring training. So he is on the upswing when looking at his current situation. So that could be, that could play well into his battle for one of these backup infield spots. The fact that he is at least playing well this spring training. Kevin Newman, the other veteran trying to find himself with the D-backs. I mean, hasn't really provided anything for the D-backs this spring training, and historically in his career has not been a very good major leaguer. So I think he's quickly entering that Pavin Smith tier. And then last but not least, Manny Rivera. I mean, I'm going to just give him the new nickname, Manny being Manny, because I don't really know what else to say about him. Solid contact guy, get you some singles, get you some doubles, but not really a lot of the over the fence power. Solid defensive player. I mean, if he does win a backup infield spot, he could do third base and he could do backup first base if you want to give Christian Walker a breather. So that is the pros in the Manny Rivera camp. But I honestly think the combination that people want the most is a Blaze Alexander and an Elvis Andrus as your two backup options. You get the upside with the Blaze Alexander. You get the youngster. You get the untapped potential that everyone wants to see and talk about. But then you also get Elvis Andrus, a guy that everyone knows, got a little name value. Like if it's Kevin Newman, you're like, who? Kevin Newman. But at least Elvis Andrus, you're like, okay, respect, Gold Glover, really good shortstop for a long time, all-star in the past, one of the biggest speedsters in Major League Baseball in his prime. Like, there's real name value within Elvis Andrus. He's been in some big battles throughout his career. Kevin Newman, not so much. So I think the combination that people actually want is Blaze, the intriguing prospect with a little pop, with a little swag, with Andrews, who is a solid glove with still above average speed. But because Jace is on his deal, I do think he will probably win one of the backup infield jobs. I think just the politics of it, he will probably win. If he wins one of the jobs, and look, Jace, he is having good spring training and he can't play most of the spots in the infield. He could probably play every spot in the infield and does have just slightly above average speed, which I do think is a little bit of a pro as well. So I think the combination people want is Blaze and Elvis, but I think the combination we're actually going to get because of some politics and contracts is Jace is one of the backup infielders. And then I honestly do think Blaze will win at least one backup job because of how he's looked at spring training. I do think the D-backs still want to develop him. Like, do you want to turn Blaze into another guy that could potentially start for this D-backs team going forward? Maybe he is the shortstop of the future, or you can at least turn him to a Dominic Fletcher, let him look good this season, and then you could turn him into a trade chip. So I think Blaze has to win one of the jobs, and I think Jace gets the other one just because of politics in that contract situation. But I will say I do prefer Jace or Manny over a Kevin Newman. Like, if it comes down to if Blaze already wins a job and then the other job is either going to Jace, Manny, or Kevin, I actually don't care if Jace or Manny wins it. I just don't want Kevin Newman to win it. I just don't think he's good enough. At least with Manny, we get that established veteran, already been in the system a couple years. And with Jace, we at least get a guy that could play multiple infield positions, a little speed. So I can make an argument for the upside of both of them of how they can help this D-backs team out. For Kevin Newman, I just don't see a role where he helps this D-backs team out, unfortunately. But I do think the combination that gives the D-backs the highest upside of the most realistic combinations is that Andrews, Blaze, Alexander combination. So we'll see if that's the combo that the D-backs want to go with in terms of what's the most realistic high upside combination. But in terms of the combination that I think we're actually going to get, I think it will probably be Jace and Blaze Alexander. But I think at the end of the day, what we care about most in this infield job competition is Blaze Alexander winning at least one of the roles. Jordan Lawler, I think, is a lock to start the year in AAA. I think every D-backs fan, at the end of the day, we just don't want two crusty, rusty, dusty veterans to take those backup infield jobs. If it's Kevin Newman and like a Jace Peterson, like, I'm going to be absolutely devastated. Blaze Alexander has to win one of those backup infield jobs. And then after that, like I said, I prefer Jace and Manny over Kevin Newman. But as long as Blaze Alexander wins one of the backup jobs, I actually don't even care who wins the other one. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. We'll, of course, talk a little bit more about spring training and what's going on with who's ever going to be on the bump tomorrow. Don't forget to hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Dose.